Hey folks, this is day 7 of Basic Design. It's a relatively quick day and relatively simple. It's largely a critique. So I mentioned that we interrupt the black and white squares project for a crops-based project. The goal of they have a drawing of an insect that they dissect and cut up in Photoshop and create an 11 by 17 composition where their goal is to direct our eye around the entire composition. If you can imagine drawing a tic-tac-toe grid across the screen. There will be 9 segments. They have to somehow, using focal points, lines, etc., direct our eye into each of those. I don't know the right quadrant, whatever the right term is. And so we critique that. They make more visual maps. Again, this is basic steps helping, especially the students who aren't art majors, along to get a sense of how do we formulate opinions? How do we become aware of how a visual work of art is impacting us? Um, and and how does a designer take into account context and take into account audience? So it starts with a simple exercise of making maps. Then we break into groups, and they critique those. If so, each one makes a map for someone else, a visual map of how their eye moved. So they're critiquing the problem solving aspect. Did they fulfill the parameters of the assignment? They have a group discussion to see, do we agree that they fulfilled and got our eye to all 9 areas? And then they start talking about is it interesting? Has it been interesting? Um, and this gets into my grading rubric to remind you all of the imagination aspect. Is there something interesting here that holds our attention? And we go back. So we talk a lot about context. How did they set their work up so that it looks good? How did they, did they do something? Did they come in and was it all wrinkled up and gross and no one wanted to look at it because it was just too crinkled? Was the printing off? Was it all gray and there weren't nice dark black ink and the paper wasn't nice and white? Did someone spill coffee on it? All those things. Those get at like, and sometimes those things can work to help. It's not to say those things are always wrong, but it's something to consider in the context of the class, especially an assignment like this. It's generally a bad strategy. And so then they're taking into account audience. And again, I tell them, when they're getting critiqued, be observant, listen to what the people are saying. This takes practice. Again, that's why it's a creative practice. You have to engage in all 4 steps over and over and over to inculcate it into you until it can just flow. And I break this up. I break up the class. We start with this critique that is very formal, as in we're mostly talking about formal elements of how did the eye get directed, what kind of focal points, what kind of lines, what kinds of bits of contrast, what happened, did they succeed? And then we talk about interesting, which becomes less formal. I would put that into the realm of meaning, and I mean that broadly. But let me talk about it this way. The 3 stages of visual processing are again about getting your bearings, finding your location, categorizing things so that you can like look at chunks rather than having to observe every single little individual thing. And then the third one is deriving meaning from the categories and locations where you have found yourself to be. The first part of the critique is largely looking at location and categorization. Did it successfully? Were you able to identify it as a composition? Luckily, we didn't have any failures in that regard, though if a student comes in with nothing, then no. Um, but so did we identify your composition? Then were the cluster of things that you used from your drawing, did they create some sense of categories of movement, or were there blank spaces? Were there places that our eye didn't go because of something you did? Um, and then when the students start talking about interest or what they're interested in, I start talking about meaning and the innate reality that this is a competition, as in, and I don't mean that necessarily as a winner take all competition. I mean it in the sense of we are competing against each other constantly to get each other's attention. One of the things I do as a professor in order to maintain control of my classroom, I speak more loudly. I talk more loudly. Why? Because it gets their attention. It dominates over the space, especially my room has a lot of echoing. It's like I have to project my voice. And I've seen people try to teach in this room, and if they do not speak loudly, they don't get students' attention. And so it's this we're constantly thinking about that. So you're not even just competing with your peers, you're competing with all kinds of things in the environment. That's why we make a white wall classroom. That's why we try to have it be relatively quiet. There's all kinds of things we do in order that the environment does not distract away, and instead we can focus on these things. So they go through that critique, and then we start talking about, okay, what do we mean by meaning? And I like to start, if you've watched all my videos, then you know these kinds of questions I ask. But one of the things I like to do is, what do we mean by meaning? Most frequently, what someone will think about is a dictionary definition. So the example I used in class today was a shoe. It's like, what's a shoe? You get the dictionary definition. You're like, that is one sense of meaning. But there are other things, because we have things in our life like music, deeply meaningful. It affects us, and yet it's by no means a dictionary definition. Or we talked about the other last Thursday, we talked about the Snake River photo by Ansel Adams, and it is deeply meaningful. When I ask students, even today, thinking back on that image, what did that image mean? They'll say, serenity, beauty, these sorts of things about nature and how wonderful and peaceful it is. And, we contrast that with, well, if, there were storm clouds and a lightning bolt and you saw part of the mountain exploding, nature would not feel serene. This notion that nature is serene is only appropriate within certain contexts. Another way I like to get at this is I ask the question, what is a star? And it was great today because I had a student who just immediately said, a burning ball of gas in space. And it's like, no, that is, what is a star made of? I was like, let me add to the new, like you gave an abstract answer, but I asked an abstract question, as in I didn't fully fledge out the context. And so then I give them a contest. Imagine you're walking down the beach on the beautiful sand in the evening. At your side is your paramour, the person you adore, and that person looks into your eyes and asks, what is a star? And of course, there's all the jokes, because some people, depending on their countenance and the kind of people that they are attracted to, saying a burning ball of gas in space might be exactly the right way to get, the next design objective, which is probably like, at least a kiss. No, most likely we mean something more poetic. That person is going for a deeper sort of meaning, not the kind of meaning that is simply, uh, definition, dictionary based. Instead, they're looking for, a star is a light in the darkness, an unending light, my love for you, all of these different things, hope, despite all the darkness that surrounds it, etc. And then today's example, so to further that, I asked, so in that context, what does SpongeBob SquarePants mean? Mainly because this was a class that knew SpongeBob. More and more, that's become my example. I don't know what that says about young people today. And I got like the typical answers that were things like, SpongeBob is a funny show that adults can enjoy the humor and it doesn't like impact the kids. And kids are excited about the thing, but adults can also watch it. And again, it's like, that's what it's made of. That's not what SpongeBob means. So, one student said it's a funny show. And another student actually started to get into this, and she said, it's a show about how work culture crushes the spirit. I was like, oh, you're close. Like, as in, that's a part of it. And that's what I mean. Why does one television show that has some of the same elements, why does it get passed over for another one that has the same elements but is doing something slightly different? The classic example would be Star Wars and Star Trek. Why do they appeal in meaningful ways to different types of people? Why don't they appeal to everyone? But you can also see this in, like, every time there's, the about, there was that time when Christopher Nolan released his movie about magicians, and there was another one that came out, The Prestige. There's a Prestige and there was another one, and they both came out at the same time. Why? They have so many similar elements, even similar actors. Why does one do better than the other? I would argue, I mean, it can be marketing, as in some people just don't know that a film was released. So you can't like, that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, two things that are released that have a similar kind of audience they're going for. Why does one connect to the other? And let me say it this way about SpongeBob. What is SpongeBob about? It's a sea sponge who is technically a dish sponge. It's like, well, you can see they're catering to their audience. That's funny. Most kids, especially in America, which this was the main target audience, don't know what a sea sponge is, but they know what a sink sponge is. Why is a sponge even that interesting to a child, and why is it a conceptual element? Because what do children do? They absorb things. They are far more exploratory than us adults. So, in the sense of the creative practice, they're like always in the exploratory realm. You might even argue that like adulthood sets in when you start refining rather than just exploring. But that's what play is. And so you have a character who absorbs and enjoys absorbing. Like SpongeBob, almost every episode is him getting excited about something new and like wanting to do it to the extreme. And so what is like the work life culture that dominates his life is so he's filling himself up with joy and excitement. And who is his like the antithesis, the villain, which he's not really a villain, but the villain is Squidward. What do squids do? They release ink into the air, or into the water. For them it's air. Into the water, and they cloud things. They make things murkier. And I don't know if Squidward actually does that. I honestly haven't watched very much of the show, but this is what I mean. Like, I can get at the meaning of the show because it's well designed so that you can see the meaning and understand what are appropriate stories for it to be able to unfold naturally from these characters, very much akin to the parable of Stan from Saunders. So Squidward clouds things up, and in the show he plays a clarinet. And so if you can think about it, like SpongeBob is always getting blown up like a balloon, what does Squidward do? He pops that bubble. He's always injecting his breath, his words, to pop SpongeBob's bubble, and he's angry all the time that SpongeBob is excited. This is what the show means. The show means like it's exploring how do you maintain your childlike joy and wonder, and how do you do that despite the fact that the world is filled with things that are trying to pop your bubble, specifically your neighbors. And that's what the show explores. That's what it means. And literally, when I say this, it's like I see the students, like their eyes are like, oh my God, like, yeah, that's why I liked it. That's something I care about. That's what I mean by like deeply meaningful. It's not just symbolic, it is actually experiential as well. So the other thing I like to do is I show a video by Nerdwriter, which I will link below, which is or like up. It's probably over here, or maybe it's over there. A little card. A Nerdwriter video about Andrew Wyeth. It's a great painting that he looks at Christina's world. It's a great painting to talk about with this project because it's about eye movement and how that eye movement creates a meaningful, interesting subject matter. So watch that video. It's a great video. But keep this in mind. There's a deep meaning that Wyeth sees in an unlikely character, someone that we would largely overlook. And instead, Wyeth makes this painting that is full of serenity. And specifically, pay attention to when Wyeth gets the idea. He's at a cocktail party and he's thinking of his society versus the society of this woman named Christina. And that's the difference between the two. That's the deeper meaning of that painting, which I think is why it is so successful, not just because it is a interesting painting to look at, but it's a meaningful painting to look at. That's what we do in this day. We are wrestling with these notions, trying to get at how do we find meaning, which again, that's where I go back to the parable of Stan that Saunders lays out, where it's about perceiving, it's about noticing things, picking up on them. It's not about bringing your ideas as to what something means and trying to execute it. Rather, it's about having these things around you. This in the parable, it's this train set, this world around you that he's working with. And he notices, if I just make this subtle twist, if I do that right here, then it can suddenly flow. And we saw examples of that in class today. We had a person making like what looked like weird skeletons falling from the sky. We had someone making a piece that was an eyeball, seen as an eyeball, like all very abstract, but these like swirls where we kept getting directed into the middle. And the students constantly, when they critiqued, would say things like, it reminds me of, and I'm like, that's the meaning part. As soon as it's not like, I like how dark that shape is, and my eye follows this line to here, and then I go down to there, and then you succeeded. It's like, no. When it connects with us, where as soon as we start seeing things in it, we're suddenly realizing something's happening here. Something's happening here beyond the physical, you know, the things that are presented on the page, but they become meaningful. And that's our real chase, in my opinion. In my opinion, the best designers are the ones who are making things that are meaningful. Um, I'm filming this between classes, but this is reminding me of a great example. I think that I largely agree with Marshall McLuhan that the medium is the message. I do think that that can limit us. With that, that's kind of a hopeless. There's not much hope for mediums that are generally, by their very nature, uh, clutter the world. So, for example, I would say I think billboards are a blight on the American landscape. I think of Los Angeles in particular. One of the reasons I hated growing up there was because of the billboards. And there's this one, if you're taking the 5 freeway north towards like from like the Orange County area into Los Angeles proper, there's the I don't know if it's still there, but when did I like 12, 13 years ago, there was this billboard that was just a hideous yellow about mattresses. And it's horrible. It physically made me angry. It was ugly, and it blocks out any interesting thing that an architect did behind it is gone. Instead, it's just this horrible yellow about discount mattresses, which people need mattresses, I guess, uh, but we don't need that sign. So I think very poorly, but of billboards. But I do believe that you need to be open. I think that mediums can be redeemed, and I have seen a masterpiece of billboard design. And it's because it gets at what I'm saying. It's not just telling me about something, it actually is tapping into a deep meaning that I enjoy. There's a place as you're heading into Grand Rapids on the freeway south into Grand Rapids where there's this little rise, and I found it in Google Street View. You can see it here with the billboards on either side. And it wasn't these advertisements here. This is the US 131 South. As you drive into this, I saw a plane taking off, and the billboard on the left had one wing of an airplane, and on the right had another wing of an airplane. And it said on the left, "Spread your wings and fly, JetBlue." And that coming in with that skyscape sort of opening up in front of me, uh, as you can approach here, that open sky up there. It was a beautiful day with clouds, and I saw a plane flying across, and these two billboards. It actually gave me chills. I didn't realize how meaningful that would be in the sense of, I mean, it's just billboards. Again, it's just billboards, but I still remember it, and like that to me is it supports this notion that I'm trying to get at. That meaning is the way to really not just get people's attention. That's what that yellow, horrible mattress billboard does. But rather, you can get people's attention and and do something that they value, an experience that they have. So when I'm talking about meaning, I'm not just, like I said, it's not dictionary. It's an experienced, embodied thing that we value. And that's what those billboards did for me. I still think about them now. This was like 5 years ago. I didn't realize that I would ever see billboards that I enjoyed, let alone thought about. And thought about that experience, especially when you're driving in a car, that open sky in front of you, and that notion. It made me want to fly. It really did. Um, so that's what today is all about. Is not just thinking through the foundations in a formal sense, but how do we attach to those deeply human things? How do we connect with our audience? All right, that's day 7. See you later.